So you're thinking about, like, really tapping into that free water falling from the sky. We're diving deep into rainwater harvesting today.
Not just catching a few drops, but really making it work for you.
And we've got a great resource to guide us right from Oregon State University Extension.
Absolutely.
All about setting up a system in your own backyard. We're talking the what, the why, and the how, even figuring out how much water you could be collecting.
But first things first, what exactly are we talking about when we say rainwater harvesting?
Well, in a nutshell, it's about capturing that rain that falls on your roof, diverting it, and then storing it for later use.
So instead of it just, becoming runoff, you're giving it a purpose. Turning it into your own little water supply. Pretty cool, huh? But before we get all excited about barrels and gardens, I bet some of you are wondering, is this even legal? Can I just collect rain?
It's a great question, and here in Oregon, you absolutely can. The guide actually emphasizes that residents have the right to collect rooftop runoff.
Okay, that's good to know.
So it's not just smart and eco-friendly, it's totally above board.
Right, it's all about taking control of a resource that literally falls from the sky.
Exactly. And speaking of smart, using this rainwater isn't just good for the planet, it comes with some serious perks, right?
Absolutely. I mean, first off, it's free. Beyond the initial setup, of course.
Right. No more watching your water bill skyrocket during the summer.
But it goes deeper than that. Rainwater is naturally softer and purer than what you'd get from the city or even a well.
So fewer harsh chemicals.
Exactly. Better for you, better for your plants, better for the environment.
Now, that's a win-win-win. And if I'm picturing this right, less runoff from my property has got to be good for, well, everything.
It is. Less erosion, less strain on stormwater systems. It's a simple act with a surprisingly big impact.
Okay, sold. Rainwater harvesting is awesome. It's legal. It's good for the planet, my wallet, my garden.
But how do we actually, make it happen?
Think of it like a system, with each part working together.
Okay, walk me through it. Where do we even begin?
Your roof, that's your starting point, the catchment area.
My roof, so it's not just for keeping the rain out.
Nope, it's a water collector in disguise. But keep in mind, the material and slope of your roof can actually affect how much you collect.
Really? So like a flat roof versus a steep one?
Exactly. A steeper roof sheds water more quickly, which is actually a good thing for our purposes. And the guide points out that metal roofs, especially in those drier parts of eastern Oregon, are surprisingly efficient.
Metal roofs in eastern Oregon. Never would have thought.
And I'm guessing all that water flowing off the roof needs somewhere to go.
Exactly. That's where our gutters and downspouts come in, your water highways.
And this is Oregon, so they've got to be ready for those downpours.
Right. Properly sized gutters and downspouts are key here.
It's like designing a whole plumbing system, but for free, eco-friendly water.
Got to make sure everything's flowing smoothly. So we're talking about gutters being like the water highways? But that water can't just flow straight into a barrel, right?
You're right. It needs a little prep work first. We got to make sure it's nice and clean before we store it.
So what's the first line of defense against leaves, twigs, and those rogue pine needles?
A leaf screen. It does exactly what it says on the tin, keeps your gutters free from debris.
Makes sense. A clogged gutter defeats the whole purpose, right?
Exactly. And even with a leaf screen, you'll want an extra layer of protection.
Oh, even more filtering.
Yep. We're talking about something called a first flush diverter, sometimes called a roof washer. It catches that initial rush of water coming off your roof.
I'm picturing like a mini car wash for my roof.
Pretty much. That first flush often has dust, pollen, maybe even some bird droppings, stuff you don't want in your water. The diverter collects that, and then the cleaner water bypasses it and flows into your storage.
Yeah, so it's like a quick rinse before the good stuff flows through. Clever. And this roof washer, it's not some high-tech contraption, right?
Nope, not at all. The guide even shows you how to make one using a simple PVC standpipe.
DIY for the win. But even with the diverter, we still need a proper filter system, especially if we're watering our veggie gardens with this, right?
Absolutely. Especially for drip irrigation, you want that water to be as clean as possible. And there are options for every budget.
Speaking of, any DIY filter hacks mentioned, gotta love a good DIY hack.
There is. The guide shows how to create a filter using, get this, air filter material. Cheap, effective, and readily available.
I'm all for it. Okay, so we've got the roof, the gutters, the fancy filters. What's next on our rainwater harvesting journey?
Now we come to the heart of the operation, the storage tank, or, as is more formally known, the cistern.
Ah, yes, the cistern. It sounds so official. So are we talking about those big blue barrels I often see?
Those are a great option, especially for smaller gardens. Typically, they hold around 50 to 75 gallons.
Not too shabby. But what if I've got, grander gardening aspirations? What if a single barrel just won't cut it?
Then you might need to level up to a larger tank, something made of fiberglass or polypropylene. They even have ones as big as 10,000 gallons.
10,000. Wow. At that point, we're talking serious water storage. You could practically water a small forest with that.
Right. And there's a storage solution out there for every need and space, really.
Music to my ears. But a tank full of water isn't much use if I can't get it to my thirsty plants. How do we actually get the water from the tank to the garden?
Good point. That's where delivery systems come in.
So are we talking like those old school watering cans or something more sophisticated?
A little more sophisticated. There are two main types of systems, gravity-fed and pump-fed.
Gravity fed, huh? So the tank needs to be higher than the garden, right? Let gravity do the work.
Exactly. It's the simplest setup, no pumps or electricity required.
I love it when nature lends a helping hand. But I'm guessing that's not always practical.
You're right. If your storage tank is at a lower elevation than your garden, you'll need a pump to move that water uphill.
And for those of us who want to be extra eco-friendly, solar-powered pumps are an option, right?
Absolutely. The guide actually highlights them as a fantastic way to power your system with clean energy.
Now that's what I call sustainable living. Any cool DIY pump projects in the guide?
While they don't go into specific DIY pump builds, they do stress the importance of choosing a pump specifically designed for rainwater harvesting.
Oh, so not just any old pump from the hardware store.
Probably not the best idea.
Yeah.
Rainwater, even with filtration, can still contain small particles that could damage a conventional pump over time.
Good to know. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially with a system like this. We've covered the roof, the gutters, the filters, the tank, even how to get the water flowing to our gardens. Is there anything else we need to keep in mind as we embark on our rainwater harvesting adventures?
The guide does have some valuable bonus tips.
Ooh, you tell. I'm all ears.
They really emphasize the importance of regular inspections and maintenance, especially after a big storm.
So even the best laid plans, or in this case systems, can go awry.
Exactly. A little preventative maintenance goes a long way. It's much easier to fix a small issue than to deal with a major problem down the line.
Makes sense. Prevention over cure, as they say. Anything else?
They also remind us to check our local building codes and regulations before we go full-on DIY.
Right. We don't want to build a rainwater harvesting masterpiece only to find out it doesn't meet the requirements.
Exactly. And on that note, they also emphasize using harvested rainwater responsibly.
Responsibly. But isn't the whole point of rainwater harvesting to, use less city water?
It is, but it's about being mindful. Even rainwater, as abundant as it might seem, is a finite resource. It's all about finding that balance between enjoying the benefits and being conscious of our water usage overall.
So it's not just about collecting as much water as possible, but about using it thoughtfully and intentionally.
Exactly. It's a mindset shift towards a more sustainable way of living.
It's about connecting with nature, taking control of our resources, and creating a more sustainable future.
Well said. It's about realizing that even small changes, like installing a rain barrel, can make a difference.
Absolutely. I'm totally inspired. This has been incredibly eye-opening. But before we get carried away with our newfound love for rainwater harvesting, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This all sounds amazing, but how much is this going to cost me?
That's the question on everyone's mind, right? The good news is that rainwater harvesting is incredibly adaptable to different budgets.
So whether I'm working with a shoestring budget or have a little wiggle room to invest, there's a solution out there for me.
Absolutely. And we'll dive into all the cost considerations, ways to save money, and even potential rebates after a quick break. Stay tuned.
Okay, so let's talk about the cost of all this.
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Because, it's all well and good to talk about eco-friendly water and happy gardens, but
it needs to be doable, right?
Exactly. So give it to me straight. What kind of financial investment are we talking about here?
Well, the good news is that rainwater harvesting is really adaptable. You
Yeah.
can make it as budget-friendly or as elaborate as you want.
So if I'm handy with a saw and I don't mind getting my hands dirty, I could potentially build a system for pretty cheap.
You absolutely could. The guide even points out that the storage tank is usually the biggest expense.
That makes sense, those big cisterns.
Yeah. But there are ways to save there too, like repurposing an old food-grade container or even connecting multiple smaller barrels.
Oh, that's a good idea. I love it. Upcycling for the win. So the tank is the biggest cost, but what about everything else? The gutters, the filters, all that?
That's where getting creative and doing some DIY can really pay off. Remember that air filter trick we talked about?
Yeah, that was cool.
That's just one example. There are tons of resources out there for building your own system using readily available materials.
So even on a tight budget, I can still harness the power of free water. I love it.
Yeah,
Are there any other, like, cost-saving tips you can share?
definitely. Always check for local rebates or incentives.
Oh, right.
Some areas offer financial assistance to homeowners who install rainwater harvesting systems.
Yeah.
It's like they want you to save water.
Free money. Who am I to argue with that? And I guess on top of any potential savings up front, we also have to factor in how much we'll be saving on our water bills, right?
Exactly. Especially during those dry months when you're watering your garden every day, those savings can really add up.
This has been amazing. So much good information. As we wrap up, any final thoughts for our listeners? Any parting words of wisdom about all things rainwater harvesting?
Don't let this overwhelm you.
Mm.
Start small, maybe with a single rain barrel, see how it goes. Learn as you go, and remember every drop counts.
I love that. Start small, dream big, and let it rain. This has been fantastic. A huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise and to Oregon State University Extension for creating this incredibly useful guide.
My pleasure. It's always great to chat about sustainable living.
And to our listeners, you can find a link to that guide in our show notes, along with other resources on water conservation. Until next time, stay curious and happy harvesting.